Hey, this is Subversive Subcultures. It's a podcast about strange groups of people who do things outside of the norm. My name is Tamara Trotter. I have a bachelor's in history. Not much else beyond that. I currently work at a domestic violence shelter and just generally try to be an active member of my community. My co-host tonight could not make it due to inclement weather in our city tonight. We are recording in Dallas. And in his stead, we have no co-host, but we do have our first commentator ever, who is Tamara Schroder. Tamara, say something about you.
Okay, so, yeah, I'm Tamara, and I am married to you, and that's how I know you. Yeah. And, I do have a degree in psychology. I am currently working at a childhood development center. I don't know that I don't...
It's not the same CDC that we're all paying attention to right now, right?
The Center for Disease... No, God, no. Okay. I don't work there. I don't have any answers about...
If we're making disease policy, that would be a different podcast.
No, the children are not making... As far as I know, they're... No. The
only thing that you guys are making is crafts.
Crafts and like alphabet... activities, yes.
Alphabets and crafts?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay, that's cool.
It is.
Right on. That's good news.
Yes.
Another thing that was made by me and Tamara tonight was tea. We're going to do our NPR voices and sip tea directly into my phone.
Some really good tea. It's really hot still.
It's a fine tea. Yep. Should mention that there's only tea because we're out of alcohol. We didn't run out of alcohol until recently.
Yes,
But now we are sipping tea and talking in our NPR voices.
Yes.
For the entirety of this podcast. We're not going to do that.
No, I'm just kidding. I can't do that. I'll put myself to sleep.
Yeah. There's a dog here, man. Think it's a dog. Okay. So, tonight's topic... Holy shit, there's a lot of editing that has to be done in post here.
Mm-hmm.
Tonight's topic for subcultures is on a subculture that most people already know about, and incidentally, it is white people's favorite topic. Guess what it is?
White stuff. White people?
Yes. Yeah, no, you guessed it. We're going to be discussing the counterculture movement. In the 1950s. This was a paper that I wrote in 2017 for a guy named Dr. Andrew Baker called Middle Class Miscreants, Adolescent Deviants, and the Search for Masculine Identity in 1950 Suburbia. That's a mouthful of a title.
So, greasers or whatever?
The T-Birds. We're talking about the T-Birds. You have special knowledge in this, having been cast as Rizzo once upon a time.
Yes, that's right. I was going to say doo-wop groups and greasers.
Yeah.
Because I did grease in high school. Thank you,
John
honey.
Travolta being not a closet case the whole time. Anyway, it's okay. He listens to this, so...
No, I'm sure he does.
Yeah,
John Travolta.
He listens to this. Okay, so, without further ado, the post-war transformations of the United States created a new American middle-class ideal. Parents whose children had lived through the Great Depression and had their adolescent experience constricted by hardship and later by the toils of war now had the opportunity for stability in purchasing the new American dream. In pursuit of this, breadwinning fathers moved their families to the quiet and picturesque new cul-de-sac suburbs, bought a couple of cars, put up white picket fences, got involved with their new communities, and accrued wealth and status to pass on to their children. This era brought about a renewed interest in the nationalized Boy Scout program, all-American sports teams, school socials, sock hop dances. These pressures and expectations on the backs of suburban youth also fostered a new counterculture in the suburban subdivision. Whether it was the rock and roll movement, Kerouac wanderlust, or emulating urban greasers, many young men of suburbia revolted against the expectations of the Beaver Cleaver nuclear family. As this counterculture became pandemic and indicative of a crisis in the eyes of the community, people looked for someone or something to blame. Was this brought about by the absence of proper parenting and values, or by overbearing parents doing just the opposite? Was this rebellion just a glorification of the anti-hero in popular culture? Was there a change in common family values of the familial hierarchy? As instances of juvenile delinquency and petty crime escalated, it became apparent that this counterculture of middle-class gangs was born out of general teenage boredom, angst, discontent, and a desire for brotherhood, pure structure, in a search for masculine identity.
Okay. So many things.
Go ahead.
Okay, you asked, like, what was there to blame? Like, they had to find something to blame. I'm wondering if the whole, like, rock and roll, Elvis with his hips.
That dude has some hips. What's your point?
I'm wondering if maybe I'm stepping on your toes. Do you go on to talk about, like, the influence of music or how...
Oh, Sweet Christmas.
Am I
onto something?
Okay, I was
feel wondering if you may have noticed what was absent in this introduction.
Well, any talk about women.
Yeah, women.
Or anyone who's not white.
Yeah, there we go. Hot damn on the nose.
Okay, yeah.
No, so, for the interest of this paper being 1950s Suburbia, you may notice that there's an utter and complete lack of black and brown people, but that, again, is very indicative of 1950s Suburbia, due to the exploration of this counterculture and a lot of what it has to offer. This is very much protected suburban kids, delving into, getting out their childish wiggles. There are very few black or brown people mentioned here, and any scope of women is rather objectifying, as was the station of women in 1950s Suburbia. I can't hear you over the sound of "you couldn't have a bank account."
Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm not giving you the dirty look, but...
No, well, I mean, someone should. So, there's a historian who wrote this article called Research in Delinquent Subcultures in the Journal of Social Issues in August 1958. His name was Albert Cohen. He defined middle-class gangs and delinquents as subcultures as, quote, a system of beliefs and values generated in a process of communicative interaction among children similarly circumstanced by virtue of their positions in the social structure, and as constituting a solution to the problems of adjustment to which the established culture provided no satisfactory solutions, end quote. What can be gleaned from this long-winded explanation is that teens exhibiting this behavior, violating social norms and laws, is decidedly not an attempt at outright rebellion, but it's instead a unified following of a different moral code. In this vein of thought, the new norms and social mores are indicative of a gang mentality, and a search for suburban brotherhood as a unifying factor for adolescence, and a search for meaning on the route to adulthood. And Scott Donaldson's The Suburban Myth, published by Columbia University Press in '69, Donaldson theorizes that, quote, as the child's desire for independence grows and his interests diverge from those his parents have conscientiously shared, the togetherness pattern of the child-centered home no longer meets his needs, end quote. I know that it sounds really common sense and redundant through our current scope, but at this point in the boy's life, he begins to strive for the approval of his peers rather than that of his parents. This could be, easily corroborated by Maslow or anyone else.
Yeah. Well, I was just wondering, like, what year this came... But, yeah, I mean, obviously for...
Yeah, he published it in '69, yeah.
Well, the kids grow and develop, and they... Maybe they want to make you and mommy and daddy happy, or at some point they're going to start wanting to make their friends happy, so, sure.
Yeah.
And that makes sense.
Mom and dad are this dystopic picture of the future because... literally how 1950s homes operate, then maybe there's a reason to rebel against it.
Yeah. Dear God, 1950s. Like,
yeah, this
clearly
brings us to the identity of the gang.
Yeah, I was going to say, what you guys are doing is obviously not working.
Yes. One can't take middle-class gangs as deviant delinquent subcultures without also referencing the lower and working-class gang behaviors. In a quote by Howard and Barbara Meyerhoff, who did field observations of middle-class gangs in the early 60s, 64, they said, quote, the primary needs met by the gang are those of resolving status frustration for lower-class boys and providing an expression of masculine identification for middle-class boys, end quote. Both the lower and middle-class boys feel alienated, and lower and middle-class value systems are altered and changed to fit the model of other boys already in the gangs. It's a very fluid structure. A good deal of the formations and rationale between the groups of both classes can be attributed to common teenage angst. The general school of thought on this issue is multifaceted, but it can be summarized as a collective or cooperative response by misguided teenagers all striving towards growing into an independent adulthood, but frustrated about the transitions from the stages of dependent childhood, and that this ideal gang is actually more classifiable as not a gang, but more of a near group, something informal and short-lived, and without clear-cut, stable, delinquent structure. The gang itself is fluid in its structure, hierarchy, discipline, and activities based on the wants, needs, and impulses of its constantly changing members. For the most part, teenagers in these gangs could come and go from it as they pleased, and need only participate with whatever intensity they felt would be fun. In this, middle-class gangs are much closer to the concept of a near group rather than that of the ride-or-die urban gang. Along with this differentiation from the standard thought of how gangs operate, the suburban middle-class gang, at least in the observations of Howard and Barbara Meyerhoff in the Los Angeles suburbs, was almost more of an edgy social group than a sect of hardened lawbreakers.
Okay, when we talk about the term gang, I feel like we need to talk about how old we are and when we grew up. So, in my growing up in the early 90s, we're talking about gangs, right? And it's like, oh, Dangerous Minds with Michelle Pfeiffer. And we're talking about gangs. I don't know.
We are just over 10 minutes in before a Michelle Pfeiffer reference, and that's pretty cool.
I'm curious, though, about, like, how the definition of the word gang may or may not have evolved since...
Stay tuned.
Oh, okay. All right, I just wanted to put a bug in your...
A group of young rapscallions had enough from their parents' wants is the most dumbed-down version.
I have so many more things to say.
Such as, but not limited to.
Just... No, keep going.
Okay.
Keep going.
The association with immoral or illegal activities was never carried out en masse by the whole group. Most offenses that occurred were committed by small groups of 2, sometimes 3, and occasionally just one person. The Meyerhoff's observations were of Caucasian high school students between 15 and 18 years of age, all from middle-class suburban families, and also all Protestant.
I don't know. I just don't even think of these as being gangs. As like...
This is the exact point, though.
Yeah.
We're putting ourselves in the perspective of 1950s parents in 1950s suburbia.
That's just a handful of dumbass kids doing dumbass stuff, though.
Future Donnie for an edit and a perspective wind. And the observations of what defined the adolescent gang member, the Meyerhoffs observed that about 80 of these young people at their various hangouts throughout the city, the middle-class delinquents were apparently easy to distinguish from the working-class boys, as they preferred Ivy League shirts and windbreakers over t-shirts and leather. In observing these teenagers' participation in these groups versus their observations elsewhere, the Meyerhoffs state, quote, "The complete absence of the social and physical awkwardness usually associated with adolescence was indeed striking," end quote. In this, they proved the point that these groups were about seeking brotherhood and acceptance. The general picture of this subculture has been described by Cohen, again, quote, as non-utilitarian, malicious, negativistic, versatile, and characterized by short-run hedonism and group autonomy, end quote. This general picture utilizes far too broad of strokes that are refuted time and again by the Meyerhoff observations. Conversations among the teens did not often bring up crime in any direct fashion, but did often segue into immoral behavior centering on dates, drinking, sex, school dances, and most importantly, automobiles.
Where are the interviews with the girls from this time?
While valid, your claims are outside the scope of this thesis.
Well, damn it.
I mean, they'd go with you if you had a cool car.
Stop.
I mean, this is according to every prevalent psychologist and sociologist of the day. The fact that they were men, I'm sure, had nothing to do with it.
Nope, I agree. Surely it had nothing. The system is
great, and always has been great, and always will be great.
The system is so great, we love it, folks.
I'm really glad that we did not vote to make the system great again.
Oh my god.
The system has downs. Edit Future Donnie. Made my wife laugh.
Wow.
According to the Meyerhoff observations, the car permeated every aspect of these youngsters' social life. Drag races were common, as were car club meetings, bowl sessions, and tune-ups. The best drivers, regardless of what kind of car they owned, were looked upon with the most favor in the gang. The size of the group on any given evening was limited only by how many people a given car could hold, as there was no set clubhouse or meeting place. Historian and cultural critic Constance Perrin laments on the station of teenagers in America at this time, quote, "All the police do is chase the teenagers from one spot to another. There's got to be a place for these kids in society, but there doesn't seem to be any place for them here," end quote. Meyerhoff goes on to explain that the car held such value as to be made the round table for most of the youth's interactions, with the radio playing rock and roll and a steady stream in the background, and that most of the group's meetings were consequently held in parking lots, drive-in theaters, and car hop-oriented burger restaurants. In regards to deviant or immoral, but not necessarily delinquent behavior, the automobile was also where small groups would congregate and cruise late into the night after curfew, and where young couples would meet in private for necking parties. The automobile's importance was at the center of nearly all teenage activity, gang-related or not, but its treacherous allure could easily be more attributed to the delinquent subculture than the moral upstanding youth. This is because, in the pursuit of more manly behavior, the middle-class adolescent, recognizing the sexual significance of the car, oftentimes turned to the concept of joyriding or boosting a car. Boys in these middle-class delinquent groups were more likely to steal a car than those in their working-class or lower-class counterparts. To quote from T.C.N. Gibbons in the British Journal of Delinquency in 1959, "In a proving sense, the daring act represents a bid for independence, and the car provides a feeling of power in which he feels so lacking," end quote. The car was such a dynamic part of their lives that for most teens, if they were involved in any other social programs, they were members of the school car club.
Okay. Wow. Okay, so earlier, that was a lot about the cars and all that stuff. So, the best drivers, regardless of, like, what they drove, were looked upon with...
The dickhead with a broke-down Fiero was just as cool as that guy with his dad's totally bitchin' Eclipse.
Okay, so my point,
There's nothing bitching about an Eclipse.
Stop. My point is, like... When they say the best driver, does that mean the dude that would go the fastest?
The guy who would probably drive the dumbest likely. I mean, I don't have information right in front of me.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying. It was probably like the dumbest.
That's
and so
trouble without a cause shit. They can play chicken. Let's drive towards the cliff.
That was my second.
Biff's cup got caught on the door handle. He died.
Yeah,
I don't think his name was Biff.
I don't think so either. You're thinking about Back to the Future. So my second point of this round of questioning, though, was like, what year did that movie come out? And like, no, I'm serious.
Which one?
Because the one where he died.
God damn it, I thought you were talking about Back to the Future.
Stop
1985.
it. Stop it. I was born when that happened. I know about it, God damn it.
58 or 57.
So,
without a cause.
Okay, so I am just wondering how much the kids were imitating what they saw in Hollywood, and then, like, or vice versa.
Hollywood was emulating in the initial place, and that the James Dean thing sealed it in. There are many people who have analyzed movie history versus sociological history that are doing a better job than me.
Okay.
Among those,
just throwing that out.
Shout out to Ariel Hogan, who analyzes film and history.
Nice.
I don't know where to find her on the internet, but hit her up with a Facebook or a Twitter search.
About
she's on one of those
movie stuff with history.
History and sociology.
Oh, that's fun.
I think she's getting her master's in art history right now. She's loving it. Anyway, as stated previously, most of the deviant behavior of these gangs varied greatly in seriousness, with the heavier infractions involving proportionally smaller groups of people. As this topic unfolds, it's important to keep in mind that this delinquency is not always a clearly defined set of infractions or attitudes. As Cohen states, quote, careful attention to the diversity of delinquent content will itself provide fertile clues for theory, end quote. Almost all of the offenses committed were petty crimes, and some of them were only illegal due to technicalities based on age, such as consuming alcohol or violating curfew statutes. Another point worth noting is that many of these deviant activities, such as drinking, drag races, and sexual activity, were incidental to whatever other reasons the group had for meeting. Just side notes. Yeah, right. The most common outright illegal activity was petty theft, and most of the boys stole from their employers at one time or another. What was considered uncommon about the nature of the thefts is that they weren't driven by need of the item, nor even necessarily desire for the item, but rather they were just taken due to ready access, and as is the recurring theme in the search for masculine identity, they were stolen for bragging rights.
Okay.
Big shock.
Okay. Well, I don't know, right? Like you're saying they didn't even... They didn't need
were
the shit.
flexing nuts.
They didn't need it. They didn't even necessarily want it. They just wanted to take it so they could be like,
Yeah,
oh,
look.
look.
Story to tell.
Okay, that's stupid.
Yeah, the boys would swap stories on what they had lifted, and the one with the most entertaining narrative, most expensive item, or most harrowing heist would be the boy held in highest esteem.
What's stupid? See, that just shows how kids are dumb. I'm sorry.
Tamara, is that different in the 50s versus now?
No.
Really?
God, no. It's not different at all. Kids are dumb.
How many mean girls took the most lip gloss? See, it doesn't fucking change. Look at us, crossing gender lines. Aren't we progressive in our narrative?
Yep.
Of the more serious infractions, there was a significant portion of the middle-class gangs who evolved themselves into smoking of marijuanas, although, like the other crimes in this subculture, it was usually just done in small clandestine groups. The observers of this behavior were stunned at the relative indifference of these youths when they were smoking and the conversations that took place. To quote again from the Meyerhoff observations, it was not unusual to hear youngsters speak of stealing, using narcotics, and the advantages and disadvantages of their respective college choices in the same tone of voice and conversation, end quote. Yeah, right? There appeared to be a widely held disconnect between the middle-class, rebellious teen's actions and his perceptions of consequence. Would this be likened to affluenza? A good deal of this crime was also rooted in disturbing the peace and creating a public nuisance. The Meyerhoff observations cited incidences of teens stopping traffic, spraying pedestrian shoppers with fire extinguishers and drive-bys, stealing cars, doing donuts, throwing rocks, and, of course, listening to loud music while drinking in public.
Okay, so... Okay, some of that is, like, legit dangerous, right? Like, I get that. Like, spraying people with fire extinguishers or whatever. Stop it. Like,
don't be a poser, Tamara.
No, like,
crust.
I am not crust.
You're too pretty to be crust. You married crust.
Thank you.
You are crust in laws.
I'm crust adjacent.
Gross.
Anyway, most of that's just dumb teenagers having fun and doing stupid stuff.
Boys will be boys, Tamara?
No,
really?
God damn it, not that. No. Just young kids being dumb is what I'm saying. Not... Give me that look.
Nobody can see the look. Yeah, give me that look plays really well right here.
Okay, when I say don't give me that look, it's because he's looking at me like, oh, you just said something that wasn't, like,
all
stop
this
it.
is getting out of town.
Fine, whatever. Then I'm not going to explain myself.
To be fair, in the incidences cited by the Meyerhoff observations about, drive-bys and stealing cars and drinking in public with their Dan Fogelberg playing or whatever, there's also a fair amount of discussion of homosexual activity cited in the field observations concerning deviant behavior, but none of the events described in their published report would be different from the other sexual pursuits viewed in the present day. When writing it, I found myself in too much of a conflict to cite that as a separate deviant behavior. That shouldn't matter. In addition to their observations about what they were calling delinquent behavior, there's also a fair amount of discussion of homosexual activity cited in the field observations, but none of the events described in their published report would be different from their other sexual pursuits viewed in the present day. I kind of found myself in too much of a conflict to cite that as a separate deviant behavior here. These observations were taken and published in an era where most homosexuals were not only viewed as deviant, they were taken at face value to also be pedophiles and or mentally unstable or diseased. There were even public television PSAs about it. It does contribute, on the other hand, however, with ideas about causation and the search for masculine identity, as to when they find this gang, then suddenly, if they meet somebody else in that gang, then there's this avenue for pursuing this homosexual behavior that they wouldn't have been comfortable with in their high school or otherwise with their other friend groups.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense. So you're saying, basically, way back in the 1950s, it was kind of the same thing as now, where, like, you are a high school kid, and you just need to find a group of friends that has shit in common with you. And even if it, like...
I wouldn't quite that to now, maybe to when we were there. Remember,
I just think, like...
compared to high school kids.
Like, okay, let's say you're a homosexual kid. You're gonna find those people if you're in band, or if you're in
No, it's
theater.
not just that
like,
anymore. That's the thing, dude. Like, we graduated high school like 15 years ago.
Well, it was like a million. Well, I'm saying, like, back in the 50s, like...
Back in the 50s,
they had a better...
I mean, even... I would not remotely assume anything about it.
I feel like all this
needs to just be tossed and edited.
Yeah, because we don't have enough Nope, never mind.
No, and also we have no idea what it's like in the present day. So when we're like, hey, but now in high school, it's like, yeah, but 15 years ago in high school.
Never mind.
Well, we can make this likening to when we were in high school versus 1950s. We can make that supposition, but to use the term, well, nowadays, because it's not nowadays anymore.
Right, yeah, no.
And the LGBT community has made major strides since then. I'm not saying it's easy for them in high school now at all. It probably sucks serious balls.
Yeah.
Not in a good way. It's probably terrible.
Yes.
But not the same variation of terrible. The point is that then anything remotely correlative to homosexuality was deviant behavior.
Right. Yeah, no,
and
of course.
Now, some groups may perceive it that way, but the majority of the public is probably okay with it. I love seeing little gay teenagers out in public. It's cute as shit and it warms my heart.
I know.
I saw a couple walking on the bike trail the other day, and they had their arms in each other, and I was coming back from the grocery store like a grown-up on my bike. And they were just holding hands at the stoplight waiting for the turn to cross. And I was like, you guys are cute, as I ran the red light. And they were just back there. It was adorable. Yeah.
It's cute.
It warmed my little queer heart.
Okay.
The commonly accepted vernacular at the time called these activities kicks. To the teens of the suburbs, these crimes were all just, kind of goofing around and done on a lark. And the authorities, on the rare occasions when they were called, they were easily manipulated by both teens and the parents, and things essentially boiled down to the common cop-out of, say it with me, Tamara, 1, 2, 3,
boys will be boys.
Oh man, none of these guys are going to grow up to be Supreme Court justices at all. For middle-class groups, there seemed to be a unified mentality that these violations of the laws and social norms would not affect their lives beyond the moment of occurrence. To quote for like the millionth time from the Meyerhoffs, even while engaging in flagrant, frequent infractions with the law, these youngsters sustained the opinion that their activities would in no way interfere with their future plans. End quote. Right?
Must be nice.
Must be fucking nice. The youth, parents, and local authorities all effectively sanction these activities, writing them off as just a phase. Omitting them from a report is really just sanctioning them. I mean, come on now.
Yeah.
Right? Right?
That's stupid.
To elaborate, oftentimes police would simply just drive the young offenders home, comfort them that this would not go on their record, and file no report of the incident. One sound theory behind the tolerance of these activities in public settings is that these middle-class boys, unlike the lower-class boys who regularly got formally arrested, had disposable income to some degree and spent with liberal fervor.
So, okay, can I just bring up again that obviously right now we're talking about the white kids, and this paper does not,
it doesn't encompass anything other than that. Yes, and frankly this is still very much the same for suburban white kids. We will have an absolute discussion about that at the end of the presentation of research.
Okay,
and spent with liberal fervor. This served as a factor of supposed immunity for some boys, as the lack of consequences for their actions resulted in what Cohen has described as a courtship of danger. This could be acted out by higher risk car theft, robbery, or playing chicken, as we talked about from the Rebel Without a Cause thing. The idea of looking for kicks and getting into fights with rival groups across town, class, or social lines was just a part of the lifestyle. In addition, there was the concept in these delinquent teens to appear as something as, like scare quotes, other. Being different was a way of appearance and also a way of acting. To quote D. Lawson in the Delinquency in Industrial Areas article that he wrote for the British Journal of Criminology in 1960, quote, mere sartorial display of apartness is harmless, but there remains the need for action, and too often they must seek this out in violent and destructive acts. As discussed, a good deal of this paper explores not only the content and lifestyle of the 1950s suburban middle class, male youth in revolt, but it also seeks to clarify causation in what was viewed as a national concern at the time. The primary argument is that the adolescents involved in this cycle of delinquency and rebellious behavior were acting out of a necessity for brotherhood and a search for what they identified as masculine identity. And while this is the heart of the argument and can be fairly readily explained, it's also not so simple as to dismiss without more in-depth explanation. The most easily identifiable factors driving this counterculture could be most straightforwardly associated with parental sanction, like motherly detachment and fatherly distance, consumer excess, popular culture. and most importantly, boredom.
Boredom.
Yay! Which we have not at all experienced ourselves this entire year.
Nope, not at all.
In '68, psychologists Kurt Gallenkamp and Joseph Reclack launched an experiment to study how factors of parental attitudes of sanction affected delinquency in middle-class males. While this study was 10 years after the subjects of our main discourse, related parallels can still be drawn from this data. A common thread found throughout the data in households with delinquent boys was that the boys found their fathers to be more sanctioning of their activities than the fathers viewed themselves to be. Also in this data, when compared differentially, it showed that delinquent boys found their mothers to be even more sanctioning than their fathers. So, to quote the Gallenkamp study, the parents of delinquents were slightly lower, more sanctioning, on the scale than were the parents of non-delinquents. What the findings of the study suggest is that non-delinquents have a stronger mother role in the household, whereas in delinquent households, more discipline, if any, comes from the father. This data is relevant especially in another study which found that the delinquent males who tend most to oppose the police and other forms of authority lack closeness to their father, as he is seen as a stricter disciplinarian. I know it's very cut and dried Freudian shit, but that is from R. Lobeck and J. Bury on the acceptance of authority and parental identification, published in 1959. Gallenkamp said in his conclusion, quote, "It may be that delinquent males are those sons who have an authority clash with the established masculine culture," end quote. The delinquent boys, by this rationale, take a more deliberate anti-authoritarian stance as a more Freudian means of rebelling against their fathers. It's frankly that cut and dried, at least according to the research of the time.
Yeah,
I mean, it seems common sense, right? Like, you're the psych person.
I know. And for the 50s, sure,
Why the hell not, right?
I mean, in the 50s, yeah.
Cheers. A similar, albeit much more astute point made by Cohen. Remember Cohen from Delinquent Boys and the Culture of the Gang? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that guy. He said, quote, "Because of the father's preoccupation with a job. Right, fucking jobs, man. In pursuit of his occupation for long hours remote from home, the child is likely to perceive his mother as the principal exemplar of morality, source of discipline, and object of identification."
Okay.
End quote, right?
Okay. God, we don't even have time to get into all this. Like, the 50s. I just, then he views...
we're not breaking off the whole 50s.
Yeah, he views his mother as, that's the example of morality and discipline. Why does she have to be everything to the child?
Because the dad has a job, and she's just at home doing nothing but this, right? Is that what's she gonna do? Open up her own bank account and get a job somewhere? Maybe she's gonna buy some property? No, that's not how it goes then.
Nope.
The system's fine.
It's fine, folks. We love it.
We're gonna make America the 50s again.
We love the system.
Fuck's sake. Cohen goes on to identify conflicts that arise from this model. His boys are expected to grow up to be manly. However, due to almost exclusive child rearing on the part of the mother, a more feminine identity has been established.
Huh.
Right? Fuck, ain't that a backfire? Another researcher cited by Cohen posits the theory that it is when the boy comes into puberty in a time of self-realization and pursuit of masculinity that this motherly showing of how to be good is looked upon as feminine, and therefore the boy attempting to become the bad boy is representative of an actually positive goal. This was done by Talcott Parsons in the Certain Primary Sources and Patterns of Aggression in the Social Structure of the Western World, published in the Journal of Psychiatry in May of 47.
47?
I know, parents had time to read that. What the hell, parents?
Oh my.
Right? Parental sanction, working in tandem with a flood of new consumerism and sudden availability of disposable income for boys to spend, also fed into the capacity for delinquency. Middle-class boys were more likely to steal automobiles than lower or working-class boys. Why was this a repeated theme in so many psychological and sociological studies of the era? Right? The most readily available and obvious answer is that these middle-class teens were much less likely to face repercussions for their actions. Big damn shock. With the prevailing attitudes of sanction by the parents, and even to some degree by officers of the law, the running scapegoat line of boys will be boys saw fit to appease these acts of masculine protest.
God.
Right? No, they're just trying to find themselves, Tamara.
Stop. Just saying it nowadays, though, it just sounds so stupid.
No, there's a reason I wrote it this way.
I know. When you read it on a... Oh, my gosh.
I got an A on this.
I know you did.
Fuck.
Oh.
Yeah, this mentality also affected the teens' reasoning and long-term applications. Many of the deviant youth looked upon this as a temporary phase. They had enough sense to realize that they would one day integrate into the adult sect of society. Eventually, according to Frederick Elkin and William Wesley in The Myth of Adolescent Culture, published in 1955, they thought that, quote, the adolescents observed that in many respects their own pattern of social life is not very different from that of the older generation, end quote. The majority of delinquent teens really viewed this as more of a passing phenomenon in their lives, a stopgap on their way to college and an adult life, because they thought they'd fucking get away with it.
I mean, that's essentially what that boils down to.
They did.
And well, yeah, of course.
And they voted for Nixon, and the world was fine again. But then when it wasn't fine again, then they voted for Reagan, and the world was fine again. And believe me, now the world is totally fine. And
now the world is so fine that we love everything.
Yeah, the world's great. The system's fine. We sure do love the system, don't we, folks?
We sure do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would honestly talk more shit about the former president, but I mean, like, I know he listens to this.
Well, he just seems like the type to sue.
Yeah, he listens. I mean, and he know full well he is on this watch list, on this listening list for this podcast. He liked and subscribed.
Listening list or watch list?
Tamara, I'll
you
watch
said it.
I will watch your list. What may have served as a call to delinquency and an alarm to parents, exacerbating the entirety of the situation on a national level, was the emergence of the lost delinquent teen anti-hero in popular culture. This is from Friedman Whitehour in You Are Too Square, I Need to Straighten You Out, The Tamed Rebels of 1950s Coming-of-Age Films in Cross-Cultural Perspective, published in 2015. Quote, critics don't seem to be able to establish whether the teen pics of this decade, the 50s, exploited public fear of a juvenile delinquency epidemic, helped fuel this fear, or as a Peens to Conformity did just the opposite, end quote. Even into the present day, most Americans can still readily identify James Dean or Marlon Brando from the movies of this era. A rallying cry for lost youth could be found in these movies, especially in a quote about the protagonists of the Blackboard Jungle. This quote coming from the movie itself, directed by Richard Brooks. Quote, they were 5 or 6 years old in the last war. Father in the army, mother in the defense plant. No home life, no church life, no place to go. They formed street gangs, end quote. These films, Rebel Without a Cause in particular, gave conflicted teens a more objective view of what their treacherous transition into adulthood looked like. Whether or not this hastened the teens' pace towards adulthood or drew more of them towards delinquency is still a fiercely debated issue to the present day. One factor not yet addressed was often overlooked as a tired, joking reply. The common motherly response to a teen exhibiting bad behavior was, if all of your friends jumped off of a bridge, would you join them? The easy answer of this case of youthful rebellion is an overwhelming yes. In the teen search for brotherhood, with the most ingrained and longest-lasting members being looked upon as an older brother or even father figures, peer pressure was an issue which cannot be ignored. If the object of all this gang association was to be accepted by the other boys and breaking away from the family structure, then the best route to take was to do as the other boys do. Members of these groups often looked upon each other for strength, support, clarity, and guidance. What they often did not take into account is that the friends they were looking to for all these assurances were just as misguided and displaced as themselves.
Oh.
Right? Fucking gasp.
Like novels we had to read in high school.
Very much so. Eventually, the outcry of the parents from Suburbia seemed to cease. This was due to compromise between both parents and misguided delinquent young men. Essentially, the parents learned to accept the changes in some of the social norms of the younger generation, and most importantly, the teens grew up, moved on, and integrated into mainstream mores of the rest of America. These impulsive, alienated, and angst-ridden teens finally came to terms with what many sociologists and psychologists referred to as the, quote, deferred gratification pattern. To unpack that into straightforward terms by Elkin and Wesley, quote, the child learns to forego immediate indulgences for the sake of future gains and thus inhibits his aggressive and sexual impulses, strives for success in school, and selects his associates with greater care. End quote. This concept seems to be common sense when viewed objectively on paper by adults, but that's just another proving point to the difference in the mentality of a teenage counterculture. There's a direct counterpoint to this made by Cohen, which states that in the consumer-driven economy of the 1950s, with the suburban family income lending to excess and lack of want, that, quote, the traditional deferred gratification pattern of middle-class boys was breaking down, end quote. Regardless of the economic tone of the 1950s, however, Elkin's ideas prove closer to the truth. Yes, there were still delinquents in the suburbs, and suburban crime was rising, but for some reason it was being looked at as less of a crisis going into the second half of the century. Factors that may be taken into account for the rise in crime can be easily assuaged, one being that as the police grew weary of giving meaningless warnings, they actually started writing citations for delinquent behavior. This could have acted as a deterrent, as the new deviants entering the subculture now had the idea indoctrinated in them that there might be actual consequences for their actions.
No.
Right?
No.
Also, gasp! With the start of conflict in Vietnam and the threats of the Cold War, American youth may have found themselves more compelled towards self-improvement, nationalism, self-control, and in general growing into the adults they've been rebelling against. There were also misdirects and new distractions, such as the new counterculture, the anti-war hippie, who became the new object to despise in suburbia. This, as well as suburban exodus in the wake of the civil rights movement and school desegregation, could also be leading contributing factors. Gasp, you should.
Yeah.
Sigh, you should. Let's be clear, sigh.
That was a sigh.
There is no gasp.
There is no gasp.
Right on. So, as discussed after that first paragraph, this was clearly about middle-class white suburban males of the 1950s, with very little thought given to their fathers besides a source of blame, which is deserved, their mothers besides a source of derision, which is extremely unfair. Women in any note weren't really taken into account in this.
Yeah, not at all.
Got
because
for necking.
Yeah, okay.
That's what they're there for, right?
Okay, that's adorable. Yeah.
They were necking?
So, no, but really, like, other than the fact that they were hooking up with these rapscallion boys, like, where are the studies about?
By the way, will be boys.
Oh my God! Stop! I swear to God, if you say boys will be boys again, I'm gonna.
Did the world turn out this way? Oh yeah, what we just
because
discussed.
people said stupid shit like boys will be boys. So I just wonder. I wonder how many studies were done and how many books were written or whatever about the women of this day. Like there has to be that research is out there. I'm sure.
Look into a lot. God damn, I wish I had titles in front of me. There are some really good ones.
I'm sure.
And literally none of them are from even within like 2 decades of the era, because of course they're not.
No.
But
see, that's sad.
Well, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's still primary sources and stuff.
I know, but
I mean, why would it have been done at the time? I mean, the woman's place was in her home.
In the kitchen, and barefoot and pregnant and
Your words.
Dude, come on.
Regardless of the fact that they were social truths at the time.
Gross.
Yeah, that's the main takeaway here. The 50s were gross.
I mean, everything is gross, but...
Well, what I really found interesting in the course of the research, it's not shocking, especially growing up when we grew up, which, was like late 90s through like mid-2000s. That's the coming of age breadth for the both of us. It is the continued emulation at the same time derision of the lower classes. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong, like in the scope of the paper, it was lower class white people that were being emulated for the most part, although once again there was plenty of appropriation going on from the the people of color communities. Of course it was.
Yeah.
Especially in Los Angeles where the Meyerhoff observations were going on. Like, that had to have been a factor. But it wasn't. It didn't even warrant mention. Present day, it's still upper middle class kids emulating lower classes. Now they do it over a wider color spectrum, if you will. But at the same time, like, that particular sect of being a deviant middle class white person hasn't changed. Like,
right.
In the least. Not at all. Like, you're still emulating lower classes than you to try to be cool, while at the same time being part of a familial and economic structure that looks down on those people that you're trying to copy. Like, that has absolutely not changed.
No, it hasn't. But what I genuinely just do not understand is like what it means in our society, what it means to be badass, right? Like all these boys.
Dude, you ever had a monster and done a kickflip before?
Stop it. You know that I have.
I don't. You did one this morning?
I did.
I did a
kickflip this morning. Okay, but legit though, Stop. I don't understand why in our society, well, and it's not just our society, it's every society, like, oh, you gotta be badass, oh, you gotta be a, like, what, why? That's just a human nature thing? Like, I don't understand why we have to be like...
It's not a human nature thing, it's a sexual thing.
Well, okay,
you know this, psych lady? Damn.
I know that, but, like, look at ancient Greece, and, like, all those cultures had...
Oh, come on, now you know full well that's different. No, you needed to have some form of athletic prowess, but you're allowed to fuck other dudes then.
Oh. Well, okay. Yeah, time out to think about how gay ancient Greece was.
Yeah, it was.
Anyway, my point is, like...
Blush.
Why are these things... Stop it. I'm gonna spray you with the cold water for the cat. Stop it. You're being stupid. Stop it. Spray.
Tea's gone cold.
But, like... Why does everyone feel the need to be, like, a badass? Like, why can't people just...
Because societal norms dictate that it's not prudent.
Stupid.
You need to be a man. They wrote an entire Mulan movie about being a man.
For a woman, and then they
wouldn't...
Oh, yeah, I don't think they meant it that way, but sure.
That's what I'm doing. I'm putting her on a trans flag.
Okay.
I feel like that's so in poor taste and or racist. I probably won't do that.
It's... Yeah, and I think Disney might actually sue you.
It is.
Could Disney sue you for that?
DreamWorks needs to sue Shrek Donkey Taco in Commerce, Texas, but they're not doing it.
Spilling tea.
Fucking miss Shrek Donkey Taco.
I know, it was a good taco shop in Commerce, Texas.
Those of you listening in Commerce, Texas,
you know what we're talking about?
Taco shop on Live Oak. It's got a Shrek Donkey on the sign, and it is fire.
That's not the name of the restaurant, but that's what we always called it, because that's...
Oh, shit. Speaking of which, you know we did not do at any point during this. We did not. You know who won't challenge you for masculine authority within your home in 1950s suburbia? The products and services that make possible this podcast. This podcast, if we don't have any default advertisers ready, is brought to you by Salvador Jones's Corn on the Cob, a subdivision and primary partner of Halliburton. Tamara, tell them about Salvador Jones's Corn on the Cob.
Well, at Salvador Jones's Corn on the Cob, that's all we give you. You don't have to wonder what it is that you're getting. If you want corn and you want it on the cob, that's the only way we serve it, is on the cob.
Would you like it as an elote, or perhaps the fine bit of butter and fire roasted on the grill? Well, that's too fucking bad.
Yeah, no,
because you're getting it in a shrink-wrap pallet that's somehow already hot when it comes to your door. Don't ask any fucking questions. Just come on down to Salvador Jones's Corn on the Cob.
Because that's how we serve it.
And our other lovely sponsor, Sad Polly's Discount Hoagies. Would you like a transparent slice of overprocessed corned beef on a fucking 5-inch thick bun that's really grossly inconvenient and dries out your mouth? Come on down to Sad Polly's Discount Hoagies. Tell them about it, Tamara.
For a limited time, we also have a blue cheese roll. It's not really blue cheese, but that's what we're calling it because it expired and we're still gonna get rid of it. Come on down to Sad Polly's Discount Hoagies.
If you want to have this sent as a catering to your enemies, use the promo code Dude, I fucking hate these people and I'm trying to cater bad sandwiches to them, and we'll give you 50% off. We really have to get rid of this inventory because the health department is currently knocking on our door. Come on down to Sad Polly's Discount Hoagies. Well, that was a very refreshing ad break.
Yeah.
Now, back to the story at hand. I think we have all of our edits and cuts needed. I was really happy with our ad breaks. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. Thank you all for listening. Ty should be back with us next week, we hope, and that inclement weather will not bar his arrival, but we are going to go ahead and thank our lovely commentator and first co-host of the show, Tamara Trotter. She is an awesome artist and also my wife and best friend person. She designed our podcast logo, and she is also our emotional producer because she keeps me sane. Tamara, where can we find you on the internet if we're interested in seeing your super cool art?
Well, thank you for noticing. Yeah, I do pet portraits, and if you want to find me online on Instagram, it is
surrealist _psychedelic _pets on the gram. She'll make your pet portrait in fun fucking colors. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, that's true. I don't really...
She's worth a look up.
I don't know how to work the internets, but I know how to work a paintbrush.
You can find her on Twitter, Facebook, and Snapchat at Dude, We're in Our 30s and we don't do that.
Yeah.
That being said, if you are new to the show or you happen to stumble upon this on the Twitters or on the podcast sites, you can find the podcast itself on Twitter at Subvert Podcast. One word, no underscores. You can find me at Donn.Trotter on Instagram or at Donnie Trotter with an IE on the Facebook.com. Now, you guys have a lovely evening. Thank you for listening. Tell your friends about this, and we're going to see you next week. Also, the music for this podcast was brought to you by the Dead Name Revival 3-piece. Please enjoy.
humans too, they need help. So do